My name is Brittany, and thank you for joining me on my channel, where I will be discussing topics on spirituality, energy work, and emotional wellness, to name a few. So if you have interest in these topics, please give that like button a love tap and subscribe to my channel for more to come. Also, in the description box below, you guys will find a link to my blog post for this video if you'd like to reference back to any of the information discussed. And while you are there, be sure to subscribe to my email list to receive more helpful information like this. So this video is a part of a series of videos I'm creating for human service and healthcare professionals and healers. This video is part one of two videos that will be made on vicarious trauma and burnout. In this first video, we will discuss the concepts of these terms, the symptoms of them, and why they happen from a clinical perspective, but then we'll also take a different approach on why these things occur from a spiritual perspective. Then in the second video, we will go over a very thorough approach to help ourselves heal and overcome vicarious trauma and burnout through addressing the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. So to give a quick background, I began working in human services 13 years ago, and for about 10 of those years, I worked in clinical social work as a psychotherapist. I started out working in community mental health for the first several years, then eventually shifted into private practice. I specialized in trauma and somatic processing work and worked with adult populations. As a quick disclaimer, I am no longer licensed and do not work in the field of clinical social work any longer, as I'm moving in a new direction that aligns with my spiritual path and my holistic approach to healing. With that said, this is not a form of clinical consultation, training, supervision, or advice. So let's jump into this video now by first discussing vicarious trauma, also known as secondary traumatic stress or compassion fatigue. This is a psychological and emotional response that occurs when individuals are indirectly exposed to the trauma and suffering experienced by others. Vicarious trauma can affect a wide range of people, including healthcare workers, therapists, first responders, social workers, journalists, caregivers, and even friends and families of trauma survivors. Some common sources of vicarious trauma include listening to traumatic stories, witnessing the aftermath of disasters, or working with victims of abuse or violence. The symptoms of vicarious trauma can be similar to those of post-traumatic stress disorder and may include intrusive thoughts or images related to the trauma, emotional numbing or detachment from others, hyperarousal such as increased irritability, anger, anxiety, or hypervigilance, feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, or diminished sense of safety, a decrease in apathy, a decrease in empathy and compassion for others, a sense of being overwhelmed by the suffering of those they are trying to help. It can also lead to increased tearfulness, fatigue and exhaustion, physical tension and headaches. It can cause sleep disturbances, including nightmares, changes in appetite or weight, GI problems, persistent sadness or depression, difficulty making decisions and concentrating, guilt or shame related to not being able to help more, substance abuse as a coping mechanism, and decreased job satisfaction and productivity. Anyone can experience vicarious trauma for a number of reasons, and not everyone who witnesses the secondary stress will develop symptoms. Some other factors that may contribute to higher likelihood of experiencing this are those who are highly sensitive and have extrasensory empathic abilities to feel others' emotions within their bodies, or those who have their own unresolved trauma history which the secondary trauma can trigger. The second thing we will note that may impact the experience of secondary trauma is mirror neurons, which are a type of brain cell first discovered in the early 1990s that play a crucial role in our ability to understand and imitate the actions, emotions, and intentions of others. These mirror neurons are essential for social cognition, social interaction, learning through observation, and our ability to connect, empathize, understand, and feel compassion for others. These mirror neurons fire when we observe another person performing an action or expressing a story or themselves. When mirror neurons fire during the observation of another, they can lead to a natural impulse to mimic or imitate that action. This is why you can watch a movie knowing it's only actors portraying a story, but when you see them cry, you begin to tear up too. Or when they are fearful, you feel the fear from their expression of it, as these mirror neurons imitate this emotional experience within your mind and body. Mirror neurons are also responsible for the saying that laughing or yawning is contagious. When mirror neurons fire while observing someone else's suffering, it can lead to a deeper understanding of the person's pain and create a genuine desire to help. This empathy, however, can be a double-edged sword, as it can also result in vicarious trauma when individuals become overwhelmed by the suffering they're witnessing, but this also leads way to the potential to build resilience, stress tolerance, and emotion regulation. Professionals or caregivers who are regularly exposed to traumatic circumstances may repeatedly activate their mirror neurons. Over time, this can lead to emotional and psychological exhaustion, contributing to the development of vicarious trauma. The constant activation of mirror neurons without adequate emotional regulation, stress tolerance, and self-care can take a toll on an individual's well-being, but there are also several ways to improve this, which we will get into that in the next video. So now, as we've discussed the more clinical terms of vicarious trauma, we will now shift into a spiritual perspective of understanding this. From a spiritual perspective, it can be seen that our souls are here on a journey of growth and learning. Experiencing vicarious trauma can be viewed as an opportunity for personal and spiritual growth. It might be seen as a challenge that the soul has chosen to face in order to evolve and learn important lessons about self-love, strength, empowerment, acceptance, compassion, increased awareness, empathy, and resilience. As we cultivate compassion for others and the will to be of service to help others alleviate suffering and sorrow, we begin to see the interconnectedness of all life. When others suffer, we collectively experience that suffering on some level. When others are in a space of happiness and peace, we are more likely to experience that when we're with them as well. We begin to see this interwoven connectedness between ourselves and others that compassion and empathy help us become aware of through our mirror neurons. From a spiritual perspective, suffering and trauma can be viewed as a catalyst for some for personal transformation and spiritual awakening. Suffering brings us to this threshold of seeking to know ourselves and the meaning of life. When we are in pain or surrounded by pain, there is no greater motivation to seek the truth, and we are more willing to practice mindfulness, to sit with, witness, and be compassionate towards our pain and emotions as a means of helping us alleviate the suffering and cultivating healing. When we are suffering, we also become more inclined to read about psychology and spiritual teachings, spend more time in nature to recharge. We work to quiet our mind and challenge negative belief systems. We practice more positive affirmations. We have more interest in meditating and seeking therapy and treatment for unresolved pain. We tend to practice self-care like resting, practicing gratitude, prayer, spending quality time with loved ones, or taking time to spend in solitude, to name a few. When we are suffering, we begin to contemplate greater existential questions like, who am I? What is the meaning of life? What is the reason for the pain? How do we heal pain? What is God or a higher power? What is the truth? Vicarious trauma may serve as a means of breaking down old belief systems, ego structures, and barriers to one's spiritual growth, leading to a deeper connection with one's true self and a greater sense of purpose. As we begin to heal our trauma and turn inward to find the answer to these questions, we begin to see our humble efforts of being of service to others to support their well-being and contribute to the greater good. Now we will shift the discussion to burnout and how vicarious trauma can be one of the many factors that contribute to this. Burnout refers to a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion that can result from chronic work-related stress. It is especially a widespread concern in professions that involve helping others and educators. Burnout can significantly impact the well-being of those working in these fields and impact the quality of care or services being provided. Burnout not only impacts our professional life, but has significant consequences on our sense of well-being and how we show up in our lives to care for ourselves and our families. Key characteristics of burnout in these professional roles include emotional exhaustion, feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, depersonalization, which can present as negative attitudes towards others and life. It can cause lowered self-worth, lack of empathy, and a loss of purpose, causing us to question the significance of our efforts to help others. Burnout can create a diminished sense of personal achievement and effectiveness in one's work, leaving one feeling like their efforts are futile, which can cause a loss of self-confidence and doubt in one's ability and the value of one's work, along with a decrease in motivation. Burnout can also manifest in physical symptoms, including headaches, GI problems, changes in appetite or sleep, and increased susceptibility to illness. It can cause persistent fatigue and low energy levels, making it difficult to find motivation to engage in one's work, also causing a decline in performance that can also decrease creativity, concentration, and problem-solving skills. Burnout can lead to increased irritability, mood swings, and heightened sensitivity to stressors. It can lead to social withdrawal and isolation, along with a loss of interest in hobbies and spending time with family and friends. The effects of burnout often extend beyond the workplace and affect various aspects of one's personal life and family dynamics. When feeling emotionally drained and fatigued, we may have limited emotional reserves to invest in our personal relationships that could lead us to not being present with our loved ones and not fully engaged in conversations with them or able to offer emotional support when needed. This can lead to our loved ones feeling hurt and frustrated, but also cause us to be irritable and resentful for the time they want of ours and feeling that they are not being empathetic to our needs and the stressors that we have going on at work, creating a vicious cycle of disconnect, misunderstanding, and conflict, making healthy communication and bonding more challenging. As we now cope with the demands socially and emotionally from work, we can then begin to feel this within our personal relationships, which can worsen detachment and social isolation. Burnout can have major impacts on parenting as well if one is distracted and emotionally exhausted, compromising their ability to fully engage with their children, which could impact their children's physical, mental, and behavioral health, their healthy development, and their overall well-being. Factors contributing to burnout can include having large caseloads, high work demands, having a lack of social support from mentors and colleagues, being highly driven and perfectionistic, being self-sacrificing or codependent, having challenging or traumatic client cases, having unrealistic expectations by managed care or the agency one works for, having limited resources, working long hours, fear of job loss or financial uncertainty, inadequate self-care and healthy boundaries, unresolved traumas that are being triggered when working with clients who have similar trauma histories, lack of recognition or appreciation for one's efforts, and lastly, a significant cause that can contribute to burnout is a sense of personal responsibility for the well-being of clients, their needs, and their expectations. This last part is worth touching on a bit more. Sometimes we may not realize how much pressure we place onto ourselves to help others, whether this is to help them heal and receive support, educating them, or to help them see improvement in their lives. We may also wish to receive positive feedback or reviews from others, and we may try to find our sense of self-worth through our effectiveness as a healing guide or a helping professional. There can also be this internal pressure to be liked and accepted, which can be a subconscious drain associated with issues around low self-esteem. If we are trying to receive validation and acceptance from those we are helping, or we feel responsible for their needs and expectations, we begin to lose our true authentic nature quickly, as we're having to change and be a chameleon and adapting each hour to another person and what we perceive their expectations are of us or what their needs are. This can quickly lead to emotional exhaustion and burnout. Now let's look at the causes of burnout from an alternative spiritual perspective. This may resonate for some and be something to reflect on to explore different ways to overcome this if you can relate to this explanation. When we take a look at the nature of relationships at their core, they are about connection between individuals. This can be emotional, physical, intellectual, or spiritual. Relationships often involve a degree of interdependence, where individuals rely on each other for support, companionship, and mutual benefits, such as sharing responsibilities, respect, trust built and earned over time, and relying on one another. Relationships are based on reciprocity, where individuals give and receive from one another, which can include emotional support, shared experiences, favors, or time and attention. Relationships are an exchange of energy between give and take, and when a relationship begins to consist of only one person within it mainly giving, it begins to become tiresome. This occurs in business relationships, friendships, romantic partnerships, and family relationships where caregiving is involved for someone with a disability, young children, or the elderly. This can lead to imbalanced feelings where we feel the weight of the relationship is on our shoulders to carry, which can lead to burnout and frustration. As we look at the therapeutic relationship through this lens, we see that there is an unequal energy exchange due to the nature of the one-sided relationship, where we are meeting the needs of another, often in long-term care, but there is no reciprocity of receiving similar energy back to our needs within this relationship dynamic. Yes, we are compensated with money and at times gratitude for providing the service, which helps to compensate for a more equal energy exchange in the eyes of the world of business and healthcare. But there comes a time where this doesn't feel fulfilling on some level, and we feel confined by these roles we are performing and playing in. Another take on this is when we break it down, we are playing a role. We put our therapy or our helping mask on for 6 to 8 hours out of the day, and we perform. Imagine going to a play and the performers performed for 8 hours in a row. They would be exhausted by the end of the day, putting out that much energy and time being in character, but also because they are having to suspend their own humanness, needs, and authentic self-expression in order to play the role they are depicting. The same occurs when we are performing the role of a helper, healer, or therapist, especially when working such long hours in these roles. Then, if you are in multiple roles of caregiving, such as being a parent or caring for a disabled or elderly loved one, this compounds this one way of energy exchange occurring that can contribute to these feelings of burnout. Our souls seek for true connection and reciprocity, and when we don't receive it, we become restless and frustrated. In the world of business, we remove the heart and spirit from matters, and it becomes more about transactions and material attainment. However, we are mimicking all of the qualities of a relationship that is only one-sided. The exchange of monetary gain for engaging in this way with others does not always suffice for what the heart and soul needs, which is what we all need to live a fulfilling and meaningful life, which is love. And one of the ways relationships fulfill that need for love is through mutual connection, bonding, understanding, and reciprocity. As time has evolved, we've moved from tribal and communal societies to individualistic ones, where we can be far removed from true community and connection with the larger social group. When we reflect on societies in the past, the healers, helpers, and teachers did not live separate from those they were serving. One interesting thing I noticed, and that had a major impact on how my views of healing relationships began to change, is when I began attending alternative healing workshops. Before, I was attending clinical trainings that were very formal, pragmatic, and impersonal. We would be learning about intense trauma modalities, often in large group settings, or practicing on one another for experience, yet hadn't built any sense of rapport, safety, or connection with one another. Reflecting on this now, this doesn't feel aligned with safe and mindful healing work, as we have seen in research a significant tell of how effective healing is from a positive therapeutic relationship and rapport, which builds a sense of safety for a person to explore deeper areas of trauma and unresolved pain. Then I started going to energy healing, meditation, and alternative somatic processing workshops. And before doing our work, we had a chance to meet one another and spend time in group work, connecting to and learning of one another. A common theme among these various different workshops is the facilitators were also participants and would share their feelings, thoughts, or some of the hardships they were navigating or found healing through using the approach we were there learning. The facilitators started off these healing workshops by building a sense of safety, connection, and community with one another, where we got to see each other as humans working to improve our lives and those of others, rather than just being defined by a role with no further personal details of who one actually is, other than their credentials. In these workshops, true connections and bonds were made and deeply profound healing work was experienced. If you ever get a chance to explore a community or tribal type healing group like this, run, don't walk. One healer in particular named Pat Jackman, who offers a 5-day intensive emotional release therapy workshop to address trauma, inner child work, and somatic processing, really opened my eyes to this. I'm going to share a bit more on this now, as she has given me permission to share about the impact she and her healing work has made on my life in creating this new perspective of healing relationships. During one of Pat's ERT workshops, we stay on her compound and we bunk up with a roommate. We end up eating and cleaning up together, dancing, laughing, and crying with one another, and visiting with each other during our breaks on top of hours of intense healing work. Pat is such a dynamic healer, and through her efforts and authenticity, she builds a safe haven and community for healing work within a matter of a couple of days. By the end of the workshops, you leave feeling like you've been truly seen, loved, supported, and celebrated. Pat and those helping her facilitate did not stand on the outside of this healing work, but joined us in this work and disclosed and processed no differently than what she was asking us to do. Her and her other facilitators' vulnerability, courage, openness, and willingness to heal with us rather than be locked in their roles as the healers who were only on the outside of the experience inspired us all to do deeper healing work. Pat and her facilitators were so open about their healing journey that it gave us all permission to hold nothing back in shame and bring our greatest fears, insecurities, and pains to the table through their embodied example of courage to share and be exactly as they are. I walked away from this work with this new understanding that healing does not come from the modality themselves. It comes from courage, vulnerability, embodiment, love, connection, and mutual support. Space wasn't just being held for us, but she gave us the gift of holding space for others, including her and the other healers leading the work. I have never experienced such a quick sense of community and meaningful connection that led to healing than I have working in Pat's workshops. If you guys ever get a chance to experience this work, especially a workshop with her, you will see exactly what I'm referring to. I will link Pat's information below, and be sure to check out her YouTube videos and reach out to her to inquire more about this work if you have interest, as this is very intense and emotional work, and it's important to make sure this is the right healing for you. Now, we must of course honor the clinical framework of therapeutic relationships and uphold appropriate professional boundaries, as this type of community healing is not the standard of practice in the clinical world, and we cannot change that without major collective movements towards that, which is not the case right now. This also doesn't make these clinical therapeutic relationships or the way the social institutions of healthcare is set up wrong. There's a beauty and sacredness in being of service in these roles to be with others during their efforts and intents to heal. However, as we become more conscious of this dynamic, we can ensure that we find our own healing tribe outside of this work to genuinely connect to others, receive a mutual and balanced exchange of giving and receiving energy and emotional support, and be with others where we can express ourselves authentically, especially in our ongoing efforts of healing and self-development. By finding your own healing community, practicing self-care, and healthy boundaries around your work life or helping role, this will help us reduce resentment, burnout, and loss of passion for caring for others. Regardless of what is causing us to feel burnt out, it can be a frustrating experience to endure this and feel the hard work that was put into this career is not creating feelings of happiness and contentment like we had hoped it would. Having any of the mentioned symptoms of vicarious trauma or burnout, or having a feeling like you want to quit your job and move away to live in a house on the side of a mountain in solitude, is a good indicator a break is needed, along with some good self-care, which in part 2 we will go over all of that. I will link part 2 to this video that will go over all the different ways to heal and overcome one of these things or both if you are enduring them, so please be sure to check that out next. And also don't forget to like and subscribe and share this with others who may benefit from the conversation. So as we have come to an end of this video, I would love to hear from you in the comments if you have ever experienced vicarious trauma or burnout, and if so, how did you recognize it and cope with it? Thank you guys so much for joining me in this video, and I will see you in part 2, and I hope you know that you are awesome, and I wish you healing, peace, and happiness.